David Sanderson. Professor David Sanderson is the inaugural holder of the Judith Neilson Chair in Architecture in UNSW's Faculty of the Built Environment. He's a globally recognised expert in disaster risk reduction, recovery and resilience. Talking about aid fails when we fail to listen, please welcome David Sanderson.
There is an irony that I've been so busy listening to these last few talks, I've probably forgotten most of what I'm going to say. but I have some of these notes here. Well, I'd like to start with a story. 25 years ago was my first experience working as an aid worker. And I went to Mexico City, to a very low-income area of 2 million people. And I was busy building houses for 60 people as part of a group of students. And I just left graduate school of architecture in the UK, and I was extremely keen to save the world. This is what I was going to do. I was going to do this. And so I went, and I was busy, and I was working, and it was messy, and it was hot, and I was digging along with my friends as well, and I thought this was really great. And after a few days, I noticed each day that the same people living would come and watch me and watch my colleagues, and I thought, what on earth are they thinking? Why aren't they doing this? Why am I doing this? I'm from Manchester in England. Why am I in Mexico City doing this? And I started thinking about that, and I reflected on that. And in fact, soon after, I asked if I could do something else in the organization, which I respected gratefully. And I've reflected on it since. And 25 years later to today, having worked in the aid world and run around and traveled and done stuff, it's pretty much the same conclusion that I've reached when it comes to this issue. And it's a very simple issue, and the issue is this, that we really don't listen well enough. I think that's the summary of a lot of it. We don't listen well enough when it comes to aid and development and disasters. I could really stop there, but I'm going to say a few more words. The summary is not listening well enough. And when we don't listen well enough, aid is wasted. And I'll just share some experiences from that. It would be in Pakistan after the earthquake some years ago, meeting a man in his mid-60s in a rural area who says with a big smile, here's my toothbrush. I've been given a toothbrush. I've never used a toothbrush in my life. The nearest toothpaste is a 4-hour drive away. He has a full set of teeth, by the way. It's a different system. Well-intended, but the wrong thing. Or of, in the same very conservative country in northern Pakistan, a consignment of goods from abroad from, of course, well-meaning people are opened up, and in those are very short tank tops, short skirts, and red stiletto shoes. That's not appropriate in northern Pakistan for those who know to have been there. Or the 500 houses built in Gujarat after the India earthquake, which are fine, fine houses, but are empty 7 years later because people were not asked, do I want this house? Is it in the right place? What will I do? Is it close to schools? Things like that. Or last year, in fact, 2 years ago, after Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, of meeting a woman in a rural area in a village who is in a tent. She's an older woman, and she's in a tent. The cost of that tent, including the sending of it, actually from the UK, is 4 times the cost of what it takes to build a house with a veranda using local labor and local materials. Now, there's something wrong with that picture. Now, let me say immediately following that picture, these are all true stories. In fact, let me say this first, that, as you'll have spotted, is anecdote, not evidence. But 2 extra bits that I'll share with you is just after the Nepal earthquake, 3 months after the earthquake, where something like 3/4 of women who were interviewed in this wide-ranging independent survey said that they were not addressed or listened to, or their needs were not met, hardly or at all. 3/4. That's not okay. And for a wider story, a big study undertaken by an American researcher some years ago interviewed 5,000 people across the world affected in disasters about what their experiences were of aid. Now, almost all said, thank you very much, we appreciate it, this is great, but almost all, the overwhelming majority said, don't be so fast to help us. Spend more time engaging with us. We're not helpless victims, we are human beings, and we are engaged in this stuff. The name of the project, Time to Listen, by Mary Anderson, and do read that. And I should point to the one image I'm going to share with you, which was Nepal. These were some people after a community meeting, and the point was listening and understanding what the issues are, what to do next. Now, I do want to say at this point, I am absolutely not a cynic of aid. This is not the point of what I'm talking about. Millions of people are alive today because of life-saving aid investments that have taken place over decades by extremely good organizations. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, and developmental aid has contributed to that very significantly. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying, coming onto this, is what keeps me awake at night is the idea that given all these challenges, it's going to get an awful lot more challenging. And we heard a little bit in the first session, in fact, from Matt England around coastal changes that are happening and climate change and rising sea levels. Just to share some of the sort of messages, if you like. Climate change, as Matt was saying. Climate change is upon us. We are part of that story. We do contribute. This year is set to be the hottest year on record. The hottest year before that was last year. 10 of the hottest years since 1998 on record have happened in that time period. City growth around the world is at a staggering 1 million people a week. I always want to say that again, 180,000 people a day as cities grow, and mostly people being born, not migrating, people being born in cities. A triumph of less people dying, and also a challenge. Where's that happening? In sub-Saharan Africa, and our friends and colleagues, of course, from Gulu University will be experiencing that in Uganda and that whole part of the world, and also in Southeast Asia. So city growth. Refugees movements around the world are the biggest since World War II. Some 65 million people in this last year alone are now recorded to be living, fleeing, of course, climate, but of course conflict within countries, internally displaced, and also abroad. And we'll hear more about that from Jay McCannon in the next session, in the next talk. We also have, at the same time, an aid system that has acknowledged itself that it's overwhelmed. The first big meeting ever of the humanitarian aid community took place in Istanbul this year, some 8,000 people. It's on the record. We're creaking at the seams. We're overwhelmed. It's not fit for purpose, quote. And we need to do more to change that system to make it better. So I'm wondering what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, this is the most gloomiest talk I've ever heard. And I can't wait for the wine, and thank goodness there was wine before this session. But I do want to also emphasize, I'm going to use the rest of this to say, you know what, if we don't listen to people, and if aid fails when we don't listen, then the opposite of that is absolutely true. That when we do listen to people, aid is absolutely excellent and makes profound, life-changing differences. And there's plenty of information on that to look it up. Aid on the whole, I believe, and it's not just what I believe, the evidence has been very helpful. But I would like to share one example with you right now, and it's one of the biggest game changers going on in the humanitarian space and also development as well. And you might want to guess what that is. And the profound life-changing thought that is actually just give people money. Just give people money. And it comes from a book called Just Give People Money. And that's the big idea. That's the big shift now. Okay, giving goods that's expensive and costly and flown in like the tent, give people money now. Now that sounds nice, but you might think, well, that sounds ridiculous. But let me just share that other people are finding that it's good, and the wealth of evidence is growing on that. So much so that the World Food Programme, the clue is in the name, their number one approach now is give people money, it's not give people food. That's interesting, isn't it? After the floods in Pakistan that relocated millions of people, over 1 million households got credit cards that are preloaded with money. Okay? And there's lots of these examples. In Lebanon and Jordan, right now, with the refugees I've mentioned, there's some 90% of refugees, certainly in Lebanon, Jordan, they're living in cities. They're not in refugee camps, hidden in the cities. How do you connect and help those people? Well, one of the things is money, and it's what's called cash transfers. Cash transfers, okay? The high-level panel that convened 2 years ago of some of the great and the good in the aid world, their finding was give cash all the time. You have to justify why you're not giving cash in your aid responses, like an opt-out. Okay, you have to opt out because you should be giving cash, because it's cheaper, it's more effective. Now, there are a couple of caveats to that, of course. One, of course, is you need markets to work. Like our last speaker was saying, you need things to happen like that. I don't know your experience, but it's pretty hard not to find a market. People are entrepreneurial. And if you're super poor, you live on small amounts. You borrow and you lend and you buy stuff daily because your money is small. The day after the Haiti earthquake, which was especially devastating, markets were open in the rubble in Port-au-Prince because people buy and sell. So the one caveat, market. And the second one is, and you hear this a lot, and some of you might be thinking this, what if they spend it on the wrong thing? I hear that all the time. People meaningfully say that, and there are arguments around that. What if they spend it on the wrong thing? But of course, I think in this room you might be agreeing a little bit that who's better equipped than people themselves? I think you, heaven forbid, or I were in a disaster, you would not want me to come and tell you what you should be having. That has been the old model of aid. And who better than refugees who have traveled the world, fled, left everything, moved to a new place, trying to forge a life? Those who have survived from disasters. Those after disasters are not the helpless victims that we go and save, and that was my own savior mentality, and I freely confess to that. Those are the people who survived and know best. And who, other than those in poorer settlements, the 900 million people living in slums, which may, heaven forbid, become 2 billion in the next 20 years, who are more entrepreneurial than the 19-year-old mother of 3 who works 6 days a week and lives in a place with no bathroom? Who's more entrepreneurial than that? So money is all about that. It's supporting the strength, the capacity, the capability. Amartya Sen's been referred to, that rich heritage of agency and capability. It comes from a long, long, long history. So in summary, what I'd like to share with you, that aid is a good news story, that very powerful things are happening, people like this are being listened to, and the ability to give cash is a very powerful thing. But in order to make aid work better because of the challenges that we have, we need compassion. Woe betide if we don't have compassion, because we can forget it. But we need our brains as well to be evidence-based, even though sometimes the evidence isn't always heard, but to know what we do based on evidence. But I would suggest we need very big ears. That's the bit that's lacking right now. And we need big ears to be able to listen well and understand, and sometimes not rush so fast, and actually listen to that. And the evidence backs that up. And there are 2 reasons for that, just in closing. One is it's about dignity. Aid at the end of the day that's good is about dignity. And secondly, I would just finish by saying we all want to be heard, and dignity is about listening to and being heard.